Hey, Beyond the Code listeners, and welcome to episode 38. Today I'm joined by Nick Furneaux, author of Investigating Cryptocurrencies and There's No Such Thing as Crypto Crime, his newest book, which we're going to talk about today. Nick is a pioneer in cryptocurrency investigations and digital forensics. With decades of experience working with law enforcement and corporates worldwide, Nick brings unparalleled insights into the evolving world of blockchain and cybercrime. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Nick to the podcast. Nick, thank you for joining me. Welcome to Beyond the Code, the podcast where industry experts and brilliant legal minds discuss the impact of new emerging technologies. I'm your host, Yitzy, a lawyer and tech enthusiast. Join us as we explore the legal, regulatory, and ethical issues surrounding AI, blockchain, and more. Get ready to go beyond the code and stay ahead of the game. I have to start by apologizing. I ordered your book like 2 months ago. It's been delivering for forever. And then I think it finally went out to shipment like 2 weeks ago, but it still hasn't made its way here. So I read your first book. And I don't know, where to what extent this one differentiates itself from the first, but I'd love to hear a lot more about that from you. I'll start just by asking you to introduce yourself. I've dabbled quite a bit in chain analysis myself, but it's definitely not something that we usually focus on this podcast. So please, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and what you do now.
Sure thing. Firstly, thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it. My name is Nick Furneaux. It's spelt a bit weird. It's like Gatto or Chateau, even though I haven't been French for 1,000 years. So I started off as a digital forensics practitioner, and in around 2015 started doing cryptocurrency-oriented investigations, just because they were coming through the door of the lab, And then in 2017, a very good friend of mine at a local police force called me about a laptop they had, which they said they had Bitcoin on it. And they wanted to know if I had a data carver for getting the Bitcoin off. And it was sort of a logical question, but it was the wrong question. And if you don't know why it's the wrong question, you need to read one of my books. And I suddenly realized that actually there was very little knowledge, and I was not in any way a cryptocurrency investor, and never have been, never had the interest. But I could see that this was going to get bigger and bigger in the criminal world. So in 2017, Wiley had been after me, the publisher, to write a book. So I said, okay, I'll write a book on investigating cryptocurrencies, which ended up being the name of it. And horribly, 6 years later, there still isn't another book on the subject.
But before writing the book, you hadn't actually dabbled in it yet yourself?
I'd done a couple of investigations, and I just realized that actually this is quite tricky. This requires some sort of procedural thinking. And also there are 3 parts to a cryptocurrency investigation. One is discovery, just figuring out that a criminal or a suspect is using crypto in the first place. The second is that sort of track and trace element. Can we follow the funds over the blockchain? But then what's the end goal? Well, the end goal is getting funds back. So that end goal is sort of seizure back from the criminal themselves, or back from some off-ramp or some exchange or whatever it might be. So I wrote that first book in 2017, and my entire life took a hard right into crypto investigations. And in the following 6 years, myself and my colleague Luke, we investigated over 21 billion in fiat value, in dollar value of crypto-oriented crime. And so 2 years ago, I thought, well, we've now got things like Ethereum and Tron and all these sort of account-based cryptocurrencies. So I've spent the last 2 years writing another book, which is much longer and hopefully a little bit more interesting. So this one here. So,
well, like I said, I haven't read it yet, but I like the cover.
yeah, it's funny, isn't it, with covers? I don't know, you sort of the whole sort of string thing. It's all a little bit, it's all a bit investigator on the telly, isn't it? But I think this sort of whole concept around actually investigations are investigations. It doesn't matter whether you're dealing with normal currency or cryptocurrencies or whatever. I think that the cover just tries to sort of reflect that a little bit.
I love the fact that you have an intro by Erin West, who is also a guest on our podcast and is doing amazing work with Operation Shamrock. So all good reasons to read the book, buy the book. I will obviously share a link to Amazon, and I didn't see that the Audible has been launched yet, but I see that you could pre-order on Audible to get an
Yeah,
audiobook.
it's
I don't know if
coming.
you're going to be the one
They've
who's
got
reading it or.
they've got an actor to record it. I'm assuming it's not like
Oh,
Tom Cruise or anybody like that, but they clearly didn't want somebody with a sort of an accent from the southwest of England recording this book. So they've got an actor to do it. So I'm looking forward to seeing how I sound on the Audible book.
I think that that's unfortunate. I'm a big audiobook connoisseur, and like my pet peeve is when authors don't read the books themselves, or I would say
I
the
agree.
opposite. I love when an author is reading the book themselves.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it probably has the opportunity to change the emphasis a little bit because when the author is reading a
You bring
paragraph,
your
the author,
passion to it.
yeah, and knows what they were trying to say. And so I think you sort of would change the emphasis and what's important. But saying that, I was very happy not to sit in a studio for probably about 8 days recording something that
I
you've
always
read.
wondered like how these recordings work. Like they must sit for hours and hours and hours, and I wonder if there are like more than one take to it. It seems like a really tedious job.
Yeah, I've got a good friend of mine who has written a lot of books, and he records all of his for Audible, and he hates it. He just hates it. You know, it is sort of mind numbing work, but he just likes it to be his voice. Audible didn't give me the choice. I'm very happy that Audible have picked it up, so I'm not criticizing Audible, but I sort of wasn't given the opportunity. So maybe the next book if I do another one.
All right, I'm gonna listen and I'll give it a rating afterwards. But
We can score it.
I recently bought an audiobook of about Bibi Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, who's like a very I would say controversial character here in Israel, but certainly somebody who's been very influential to Israel's history. And I
Sure.
was very curious to hear a little bit about his background and like what made him who he is. And I was excited because it said that it was being read by Bibi. And so I was like, great. Like the prime minister took out, I don't know, 36 hours of his life to go and read the book. I want to hear it. And the first chapter was like fascinating to hear him tell it from his own mouth. And then chapter 2, they brought on some like robotic actor and it just was horrible. I couldn't even get through the second chapter. So
But have you heard
if you want to
AI? Have you heard
reconsider,
an AI version of you yet? I've got a version of me speaking Spanish. I don't speak any Spanish apart from to order a beer, and
really?
it's me. And it's me speaking fluent Spanish. It's really quite weird, and I love my
Okay,
AI
I
stuff,
got
but
to
I'm
try
not
that.
sure I like it.
Okay, I haven't tried that yet, but it's definitely going to be on my list now. Uh, anyway, so thank you for that background. I definitely want to hear a little bit more about when you start writing your first book and maybe some of the cool success stories or failures that you've come across over the years as an investigator. Are most of your clientele retail or on the law enforcement and government side?
Yeah, it is 90% law enforcement and government. When I
I
wrote the
figured.
first book in 2017-18, I produced some training, sort of some foundation training, and then some more advanced training, and it just went crazy. We ended up training thousands, mostly of law enforcement and government investigators around the world. And then we started figuring out ways to trace through mixers and things like that. And obviously, with law enforcement, we're very interested in those capabilities. Um, I lost count of how many law enforcement officers we trained, but we were training flat out when we weren't doing investigations. So that's been the sort of the primary interest. But I think this is an interesting point, actually. I made a major error when I wrote Investigating Cryptocurrencies. I assumed because cryptocurrencies has the word crypto in it, which of course is from the cryptography element, and that this was on computers, that it would be digital forensics people. It would be highly technical people that would be investigating this type of evidence. And I've just been proven to be utterly wrong. Because, although we do have digital forensics people involved in this, it is cyber people, it is financial investigators, it's compliance people, legislators, lawyers, tax people. It's much, much, much broader than we were expecting it to be, which is why the second book is very much oriented to a broader and slightly less technical audience. And it was true that back in sort of 2017-18, when I was training police officers, it was technical people. We had Python scripts and we were writing batch files to grab stuff, and it was all loads of fun. But then I started to notice there was all these people at the back of classes with their arms crossed who didn't know what we were doing. And this was the financial investigators. Once we got into the track and trace stuff, they were all over it. They were amazing. But, when it came to writing batch files and bits of Python code, they were left absolutely in the dark. So we've had to change our teaching for a much, much broader audience. And I've tried to reflect that in There's No Such Thing as Crypto Crime, the new book.
And as the technology has developed and as more and more people are exposed to it, I guess like on a retail and a day-to-day basis, have you found the education side to be easier because these are less foreign to most people?
No, it's sort of got harder.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was at a conference a few weeks ago. I try not to go to conferences. I am much happier with a keyboard and a screen and some code and something. I'm much happier in that environment than I am as I was on Tuesday night, stood on a stage in front of 400 serious and organised crime officers, And I think the problem is in the conference I was at the other week, very good person. I obviously won't say who it was, but was stood on the stage talking about crypto-oriented investigations. And they said something that was
he didn't know what the hell he was talking about.
They were just wrong. And it wasn't bad. And I understand why they were wrong, because it's sort of a misapprehension or a misunderstanding of how things work at a fundamental level. And I keep hearing this. And so because people that go on YouTube and maybe read, there are some books out there that talk about crypto-oriented crime in a broader way. And so you can make certain assumptions. Let me give you a really simple example of a misunderstanding of crypto. And this is a silly one, so it's not going to offend anybody that's said it. When we move like a piece of Bitcoin, so let's say you said, hey, it was lovely to meet you, and I'm actually going to charge you to be on this podcast of half a Bitcoin, $40,000 to come on this podcast. And I sent you that half a Bitcoin. All of that syntax is utterly erroneous. So the concept of sending or receiving Bitcoin is simply wrong. It never moves. All we have is a blockchain ledger.
A ledger representing that now that same Bitcoin is not in your wallet, it's in somebody else's wallet.
So actually what you're doing is you are unlocking that Bitcoin that I own on the blockchain, and I'm relocking it with your public key. But it never moves. And although this sounds like semantics, it really isn't when you're trying to train financial investigators who are used to assets moving. So it moves from this bank, and the bad person moved it to this Swiss bank. And although it's electronic, that asset, if you like, has sort of physically moved from that bank to that bank. But within crypto, it's just an erroneous thought. So we get people asking us about, well, how do we deal with the issues of where the server is that Bitcoin exists on? Have we got the ability to go and seize that because it's now in Switzerland? Because they're thinking like fiat currency. Does that make sense? And the whole semantics of sent the Bitcoin and I received the Bitcoin, it plays into that misunderstanding that I say, oh yeah, I've sent that to my buddy in Israel. So everybody,
because people are trying to conceptualize it with what they're They
So the
understand.
jury thinks, oh, that Bitcoin's now in Israel. The judge thinks, oh, that Bitcoin's now in Israel. But this is filtering down into the investigators. Oh, we're going to have real issues
Yeah.
getting that back because that Bitcoin's in Israel now. No, it's not. It exists on 15,000 ledgers on people's, probably on your neighbor's computer, all over the world. And so that's a really simple illustration of when, for example, you go to court, or if you sit trying to explain this to a senior police officer or, the head of some law firm, is trying to get them to understand that this stuff hasn't gone anywhere. Which gets us back to that very first question I was asked by that police officer. How do we write a carver to carve the Bitcoin off this computer? And I called him and said, it's not there, dude. I'm looking at it here on the blockchain. And he got very, very confused and just trying to get people to understand the concept of a private key in a wallet and the assets are not there. And I used the example of a wallet with credit cards in it. It controls assets, but the assets aren't in the actual wallet. Just trying to get them to understand the real use of those semantics. There's lots of examples like that where that lack of fundamental knowledge as to how cryptocurrencies work affect the wording that's used, which affects people's understandings. So whereas 5-6 years ago, we would go into a classroom and people would go, we don't even know what this is. I saw Bitcoin in the Daily Mail, which we have here in the UK, that says Bitcoin is dead on Thursday,
Sure.
and then Bitcoin's really good on Friday. So they're getting that knowledge from the media, and we were starting from scratch and building up. Now we're having to undo what they think they know, and go no.
That's a good point. Yeah,
put that to one side and let's start again. And
re-educate.
Understand how it works.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so do me a favor. Walk me through, to the best extent that you can, what a forensic process would look like if I was, for example, either, I don't know if you even do offer services to retail, but let's say I had, 30 Bitcoin was somehow hacked from my wallet, and then I was looking for a consultancy firm that could help me kind of unravel that and see where the Bitcoins have gone and whether or not they could be seized. What would I gave you a call. What would the process look like on your end?
Okay. So first, let me just answer the question as to whether we offer those services. So all of my training was bought out by TRM Labs that create, forensic track and trace software.
Sure.
Superb software. In a similar vein to Chainalysis, Elliptic.
Number one,
these other good companies that are out there. But I represent TRM. I do a couple of days a week for them. I'm a board advisor for a company called Asset Reality that do sort of asset seizure and management of assets for government and that sort of thing. And then I try and support people like Erin West. The process is really simple, actually. There's lots of different start points, but let's go with your example. So I sent you half a Bitcoin for this podcast, and then somebody stole it off you, and you're like, I've
Wouldn't
lost
that be nice?
$40,000 in my Bitcoin. So what would happen? Well, the discovery is already
almost
done.
50, by the way.
Well, is it almost? I haven't checked today. Anyway, so the discovery is already done because you know that you've had this stuff stolen from you. So the first thing that I'm thinking about is where have the funds gone? And the second thing I'm thinking about is how was it done? So how did this happen? So the track and trace is quite simple. It is an open blockchain. Anyone can go to a blockchain explorer and follow those funds from address to address. So that's easy enough. Where you need a commercial tool is really attribution to help you with visualization of the track and trace of the funds, and then attribution of addresses so that we can identify off-ramps. So whether that be, we call them VASPs, virtual asset service providers, exchanges and financial institutions and that sort of thing, places where a criminal can take those funds and can turn them back into some sort of fiat currency, back into dollars or whatever it might be. So that physically track and trace, really not hard. I teach a kid to do that. The issue is when we then see laundering of those funds. So they take your half a Bitcoin and they push it through a mixer, which obfuscates lots and lots and lots of little transactions and mixes it with third-party funds and other people that have been sort of victimized and defrauded. And then these funds spit out into different exchanges. That's when it starts to get really complicated. I've done that on paper in the past. It's perfectly doable, but using a commercial tool, like TRM Forensics is going to really help you to do that. Once you've identified an off-ramp, so let's say it all hits up at Kraken or a Binance or something like that. Well, now we need some sort of legal approach to that exchange to say, this is the proof that I or my client owns these funds, and we want you to freeze that until we can get some sort of order to have them sent back. And then, of course, we go into the court system and all the rest of it. So the process of that is really very straightforward. But sometimes it's simply not needed. So I told to the serious organised crime people on Tuesday night, I told her an example of a very nice lady, very, very short story. But she called me on one Saturday morning when I was sort of getting ready to go out with the family. And she said, I've been trying to find you, which is always nice. And she said, I've had crypto stolen from me. And I was about to say to her, look, just give me a call Monday. I'm really sorry. Give me a call Monday. I'll get on it. We'll see what we can do to help you. And I just made the mistake of saying, what was it worth? And she said, £15 million, personally. Wow. So we were now not going to the zoo
so
that
then you
morning.
Told the wife and kids.
Yeah, that's right.
Hold your horses, guys.
Slowly close the office door. So here's what's interesting about this story. Is that
wait, is there a good ending there?
Yeah. We got her 15 million back in 48 hours, right? And this is
wow.
So I do the due diligence. She's a very impressive woman, self-made, single mum, super impressive lady. I liked her very much, and all the funds had moved from her crypto address, for those that are not into this stuff, and had moved to the suspect's address, whoever this was going to be.
Okay.
And at the end of that day, so we were about 36 hours after the theft, the funds were still there. They were still there.
In the suspect address?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, this is weird.
Yeah.
Because, when you sort of, you target somebody and you pull off a heist and you steal £15 million, you really know what you're going to do with those funds.
You want to cover your tracks.
You've got a plan, for these funds. And so I actually phoned a buddy of mine at Metropolitan Police and said, look, we got British National, £15 million loss. Can you give me a hand? And next day, they were still there. So anyway, my spider senses are tingling because this is weird. And then the suspect started taking tiny amounts and started pushing it through Tornado Cash, which is a mixer. Little bits. And we're thinking, this person doesn't know what they're doing. So I went back to the lady and said, can you do me a favor? Can you just write an email or a text or WhatsApp or something to everyone in your immediate circle to say, I've been defrauded, I've lost loads of money, but it's okay because I've contacted the A-team and they're talking to the police and we're going to find him, we're going to put him in prison. And she was like, no, you're suggesting it's somebody close to me. That's a terrible thing to say. I trust everybody. I'm like, no, we do this for everybody. We don't. But we do this for everyone. Just send it out. So Sunday night, she sent the email out. Monday morning, it was my ex-partner. And he'd phoned her up. Oh, I'm really sorry. We needed the money. And yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah. So we got to set up some nice secure wallets. This person sent all the funds back. And then, good on her, she walked into a police station and shopped him, which is such great, after she got the funds back. But I think what's interesting about that is that, and this was the story I was telling on Tuesday night to all these officers, you didn't need to have cryptocurrency knowledge to get that. You just needed to have knowledge of frauds and money laundering because it looked wrong. If these funds had moved into a bank account and they were still in this bank account 2 days later, you'd be like, this is weird because this money should be whizzing off and going into different assets and disappearing off into difficult to trace countries. It really depends what you're looking at.
I'm wondering if when you call the Met, you get a different response than when I call the Met, because I had a similar situation. with a UK resident, and they sent us to like Action Fraud, and then Action Fraud didn't know what crypto was, and they were asking for all these like details that you'd have like in a traditional scam, and I couldn't provide those things. So I guess I needed a little bit of the Nick charm
Well,
or
do you know, and it's
contacts.
it's a little unfair, really, in that. Um, so yeah, I hear you with Action Fraud. I was with the commander of Action Fraud actually this week, and they're very aware of the limitations. So they'll be making changes in due course, I'm sure. Um, but I'm just very fortunate because I've trained all of these people over the years. There's still a process to go through. I think the difference is that, and actually this is a problem, man. This is, and I often sort of bemoan this, in that, when it's 15 million, I can phone buddies at the Financial Intelligence Unit, and they're going to go, "Whoa, yeah, let's look at this." But I had a friend call me last
But for
week, and
150 or 15,000 bucks, nobody's
this was
gonna
the
lift their
problem.
pen.
Last week, the guy,
And you wouldn't
18
have
grand.
either. You would have gone to the zoo.
18 grand to you and me, still a lot of money. I get it. That's still a
Yeah,
load of cash. And
yeah,
I would want it back.
yeah,
I'm not like some squillionaire. And the reality is that you walk through the door of a police station and 18 grand just doesn't push the big red buttons. And it needs to. And one of the things that I'm trying to say on these podcasts, one of the things I'm doing in conferences at the moment, is saying, can we please just go back to the victim? Can we please remember that, the big North Korean hacks for $1 billion, this is all fun stuff and it looks good in the newspaper and on Reddit, but there's real people losing real money that is really important to them.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, I support Erin as she wrote the foreword to my book. As you know, I support her very, very closely in Operation Shamrock, and we do our best to help people. And we often do our best to help people free of charge. But the problem is, as soon as we have to, if the police can't touch it for whatever reason, or they don't feel there's a weight of evidence there, and we have to go a civil route, the problem is if we pull in some London lawyers, even if it's a Friday and they've already had a couple of glasses of champagne and they're feeling good about life, you're still looking at probably 50 to 70,000 pounds sterling to go through the legal process of freezing orders. And we got to find a way to make this easier, to make this cheaper for people.
And accessible. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
I,
I'm
I imagine a lot of this stuff could be automated, at the consumer level, anyways.
That is the way forward, mate.
And I
Is
guess those are tools that need to be built.
Yeah, we need AI tools that can sort of automate some of the investigations to a degree. You can't automate everything. Create reports, help us to see if there's a weight of evidence. Because, let me give you an example of a case that is, what would that have been, 2019, 2018, really early. He was a Chinese national living and
Hmm.
working here in the UK, decided to cash in his pension and put it all in Bitcoin. So you imagine how much that would be worth now. He bought Bitcoin in 2018. So he bought £250,000
Smart
worth of
man.
Bitcoin in 2018. And he
Hmm.
had it all stolen. And the funds moved from his address, his Bitcoin address, to another address. And 6 years on, it's still there. Hasn't moved. And there's nothing we can do. Because until the
Why?
person that nicked it, who I think probably nicked it and then went, "Oh crap, I don't want to go to prison," and so decided never to do anything with it ever again, or wait until they could
Oh,
figure out a way
yeah,
to
no,
move it.
that's you're saying until the funds are on the move. Well, so that's a good point, and it's actually a question that I wanted to ask you. I've read Nick Bilton's book, American Kingpin, about Ross Ulbricht and the Silk Road, and I've read Andy Greenberg's book, Tracers in the
Oh
Dark,
yeah, good book.
and I've seen a lot of these, huge, like the North Korean and other like big newsworthy heists get like unraveled slowly over time, and I wonder, is it actually possible to get away with a crypto heist in today's day and age? Or is it just a matter of time? Like eventually, even if you sit on it for 10, 15 years, you're going to off ramp and we're going to find you. We're going to unravel all the Tornado Cash and other mixers, and we're gonna unravel Bitcoin and eventually Monero. I've heard that some of the analysis tools have a way of like kind of unraveling Monero. Eventually, we're going to find everything, and as soon as you off ramp, and you will off ramp, then we'll find you and we'll get you. Again, my question is it actually possible today to get away with a crypto heist?
I think it still is today. And we're seeing places like North Korea being very successful in off ramping quite large sums, actually, over time. I think that will get harder as more and more countries want to sort of get legislation in place and all the rest of it. But I think already just what I would describe as normal criminals. We had a guy who was a money laundering agent here in London, so a Middle Eastern man that was working here in London and was laundering large amounts of drugs money for several drugs gangs, and was doing a really good job of it. We'd been watching for a while. The movement of funds just couldn't pin it on him. And then one day there was this really weird outflow of funds that then hopped straight to Coinbase. So the police went straight to Coinbase and went, "Who was this?" And it was a Rolls-Royce dealer. So they went to the Rolls-Royce dealer and they were like, yeah, this guy came in and said, could he pay in Bitcoin? And we're like, have you got paperwork on this guy? Yeah, got his phone number just here. Because the guy brought it back in and there was a problem and they said, "I will call you when it's done." And, yeah, here's his number. And that was it. That's how he got caught. So he was doing a terrific job.
Well, that proves my point.
Yeah, and until he just went,
eventually
"Hey,
you're gonna off ramp."
Yeah, and that was it. He was gone. Yeah, because what you can't do once I've sent you this half Bitcoin, I can't control what you do with it. So, even if like we're co-conspirators, and we're doing badness together and I move you half Bitcoin to say thank you for doing that bit of a hack for me. If you decide to go and buzz this to Binance or there's a place in Hong Kong selling their apartments in Bitcoin. If you decide to go and buy that apartment, unless you are really good with your KYC information, and you've got lots of fake passports and stuff going on, we're going to get you, and we're going to find out who bought that. It's you. And, when obviously we don't, do terrible things to people when we arrest them in this country. But, when we ask you nicely who sent you that Bitcoin, you're probably going to roll over, I suspect, at some point.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That goes to my point of eventually off-ramping. When you off-ramp, because it's just a matter of when. Even if you decide to spend in Bitcoin, if you're spending enough money and you're going through somebody who's going through doing any kind of KYC process, you're going to get caught. So I reckon it's still very, very hard, if not impossible. I mean, even if you do off ramp and you manage to get away with it, like the trace is always there, and it might be 10 years, but somebody will eventually find that information. And it's just not a great way to launder money or steal money. Contrary to what people initially thought, crypto is, way too exposed.
It is. I think the problem is it's sort of the best of a bad bunch. I mean, cash is the win. But of course, moving large amounts of cash over borders now is difficult, and you look suspicious.
And cash is being eradicated, like in most countries. I know, like in Israel, like they keep lowering the amount of cash you're allowed to.
Sweden is trying to go completely cashless, and I changed a little bit of money, and I mean, almost nobody would take it. They would sort of look at you when you waved your note, and have you not got a card you could use or your phone? And but then again, I was in an island in the Mediterranean the other day, and the taxi driver would only take cash. So, we're not there yet, but we're definitely going all electronic, which is going to be fun because Russia seems to be cutting all of the cables in all the oceans at the moment. So, well. Allegedly, let's be honest about that, non-political point. So we cut enough cables, then none of us are paying for anything with any cards or phones. So, fun times.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you So I was listening to this video that you were doing on YouTube where you were just kind of giving top points for security purposes, or anybody who's, and coming into the blockchain crypto market, or, is already in the crypto market. And you recommended downloading a hardware wallet. And, there are the obvious benefits to not having, not your keys, not your cash. So like, definitely don't keep your money on a centralized exchange. But I found hardware wallets to be like one of the worst features of blockchain and crypto.
Yeah.
And I wonder what your thoughts are about on MPC solutions. Like, I personally use Zengo, which uses
Okay.
biometric data via MPC, and they have, I don't know how many years they've been active, but zero hacks ever.
Well, that's interesting to hear. Didn't
What
know that.
So first of all, if you're not familiar with their tool, you should definitely download and try, because it's a phenomenal user experience. I'm actually having their CEO on the podcast next week, so you'll have an
What's it
opportunity to
called?
hear a little bit more from him. Zengo, Zengo. I'm constantly surprised at how many people are not familiar with them, because
No.
like, it really is the most user-friendly crypto wallet, and like I said, never been hacked. I think they actually have like a bounty out for like $1 million or something if anybody can manage to hack their wallet.
I absolutely wish them all the best. I mean, so far, in fact, so far, the only thing that has a 100% record of not being undermined in any way at all is the Bitcoin blockchain itself. Never been hacked. And everyone assumes, because they're always hearing about millions and billions of pounds being stolen in Bitcoin, that there is something inherently wrong. The Bitcoin code is a thing of beauty. I mean, it needs to be printed off and put in a museum. It's extraordinary, the way that it functions. Just phenomenal simplicity, really, using a lot of off-the-shelf crypto and methodologies and ideas that had been around for a few years. Bitcoin didn't come from nothing. There had been a lot of sort of feed up to Satoshi Nakamoto. He, she, they. That's not a gender point, as we just don't know if it was a he or she or if it was a they. It's they brought all that together into something that was truly amazing. And apart from a tiny, tiny issue in the first year, we've had no issues with that whatsoever. Pretty much everything after that. Hardware wallets are good. They're just clunky and difficult to set up and use. But, there's plenty of people on YouTube right now showing that they can, pull apart an XYZ hardware wallet and reverse engineer the chip and doing all that sort of stuff. So, anyone that says they haven't been hacked, then I clearly wish them all the best, because that will make them
check
a
out
target.
Zengo.
I'll do that. Yeah. And I'll listen in on the podcast with the CEO next week. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah. My 13-year-old son recently had his bar mitzvah, which is like a coming of age ceremony, and he took some of his money that he got from his gifts and he bought Bitcoin. So obviously he needed to open up a wallet, and I told him don't go near any of the sexes. So he downloaded a Zengo wallet and he did the whole thing himself, and he doesn't have to worry about his seed phrase. Check it out.
I will. That's a good tip. The problem is with this industry, and because I'm an investigator, I tend to stumble across stuff primarily when it goes terribly wrong. So most of the wallets, and it's because I know the vulnerability with this one. Whereas if something actually hasn't been hacked, that's probably why I haven't heard of it, because it sort of hasn't crossed my desk in any way. So yeah, I'll have a look. That's interesting.
Another thing I wanted to mention that came up within the framework of my research ahead of this episode, like I said, your book hasn't come yet, but I was listening to a podcast episode that you did with the Social Engineering podcast.
Yeah.
I don't know when it was exactly.
That was a while ago.
But you guys got into a very heated discussion as to whether or not you could buy smoothies at Walmart with crypto. And it was an overwhelming no.
I remember that. Yeah.
I just wanted to update you that you actually can. Today, there are services like Zappo and Zen.com, which is a MasterCard product where you could actually deposit crypto onto your credit card. And then you can go anywhere in the world and you could just buy things using your credit card. And then rather than taking the money from your bank account, it just takes it from your crypto wallet. So it does
Cool.
open up, obviously with KYC, etc., but it does open up like a world of use cases for people who are, living in the crypto world. And contrary to what, they on the social engineering podcast thought, as many people who are unfamiliar with crypto think, there you absolutely can spend crypto. It's not just the kind of
That
thing
is
that you
great. I
need
think
to you need to
also
off
as
ramp
whether you
and
can
order.
actually buy a smoothie at Walmart. I'm not here with any funds.
Well, I still don't know if you could buy a
No,
smoothie in
that's
Walmart,
right. But if you
but if they do
can,
sell
you can
smoothies,
use
you
Chris.
could pay in crypto.
I think the problem with a lot of this stuff, um, it is what I just said before, is that I tend to only come across. I'm not an investor. Everyone assumes that I was buying Bitcoin at $300. I, I I just never have had an interest in it, and I
Big
wish all
mistake,
the
man.
best to everybody that's gone. And I had a guy call me. Just he'd had a security problem, and he'd bought ETH during the crowd sale before it launched. At $1 an ETH, and he borrowed
Bought and
like
then
five
sold, or bought
thousand
and is
bucks.
still hodling?
He was still holding it.
Wow.
And he bought it. He borrowed
Nice.
$5,000 from his mum and bought it at $1 an ETH. And I think he still held like
Yeah.
85% of it. And I'm like,
As my
dude,
father-in-law says,
high five to you, man. I mean, that's awesome
yeah.
because in fact, Chris Adnagi, who runs that Social Engineer podcast, he asked me a number of years ago. It's in my book actually, and it was like at $1,500 a Bitcoin. And he was like, dude, how much of this stuff should I buy? And I'm like, dude, don't bother. It's just all criminal. And, and he hates me now. I mean, he literally, honestly, when it broke like
As well he
$70,000,
should.
he was on the phone to me going, what the heck was that advice, man? And I'm like, well, don't take investment advice from an investigator, life lesson for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I all the best to people that are into that market. It just doesn't hold a fascination for me. As I said at the start when we were chatting, I prefer to be behind a screen, with a keyboard trying to do something interesting and trying to do something new to try and help victims. So I'm not that interested in what the Bitcoin price is particularly, even though it's interesting.
That's unfortunate. Whenever Bitcoin spikes, my wife is like, "Don't you do Bitcoin? Like, why don't we have more of it?"
What's wrong with you?
So exactly.
Yeah.
Got to get on that. So tell me, just going back to the book, the title is "There's No Such Thing as Crypto Crime."
Yeah.
Like, what's the deal behind that? Like, why is there no such thing as crypto crime? And why that choice of title?
It came from a presentation that I gave at conferences all over the world during lockdown. And it is because we have a misunderstanding globally, mostly within law enforcement, that there is this new category of criminal enterprise called crypto crime. And so they're building crypto departments of crypto trained people with crypto tools. And now don't get me wrong, we need those skills and we need those people.
It's just crime.
But the issue is just crime. And the problem is it gets lost a little bit. So here's a really good example. We had a guy in London who was selling Bitcoin person to person on the street, essentially. And he had someone that he'd sold to before contact him and say, look, can I come and meet you at your home? And I need to buy some Bitcoin, get a coffee together. So he invited these two people to his home. When they arrived, they tied him up, pistol whipped him, and forced him to move them all their crypto. So I always use this as an example. So they stole loads of crypto. Does that make it a crypto crime? Well, hold on a minute. Let's just think of the clues involved in this investigation. Firstly, we've got aggravated theft. We've got assault, attempted murder, all these sorts of things. So we've got ANPR, number plate recognition of these people driving into the street, potentially from somewhere. We've got fingerprints where they press the doorbell. We've probably got doorbell cameras from neighbors. We have got DNA in the house. We've got all of this stuff before we ever fire up a track and trace tool and have a look to see where the crypto went. And frankly, we're probably more likely to identify the perpetrators from all of those traditional investigative methods than we are if they've just moved crypto to some Russian exchange. So I keep pushing this. We know how to investigate money laundering. Crypto is just a different payment mechanism, different asset movement. We know how to investigate romance fraud. We know how to investigate investment frauds. So don't forget all of those investigative methodologies. Let's just bring in the skill set for the crypto part. But it doesn't represent a brand new. But, there's frauds that were being perpetrated by the Greeks. I think I've got it in the book. So 2,000 years ago, there was insurance fraud. And so we've been investigating this stuff literally for millennia. But we've just brought a new payment mechanism in. That's all. And so although the title of the book is a bit clickbait, I appreciate that. Because
nothing wrong with that.
There's a lot of crime which is being perpetrated with crypto involved in it. I'm just trying to make the point. Please do not forget standard investigative methodologies and models and just bring this element in alongside it. It doesn't sit alone. So that's the sort of the reason for the title.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Just I don't get paid by these guys. I just really like their product. But going back to that story about the guy who got tied up and they forced him to transfer his crypto over. So Zengo actually just released this really cool feature for situations like that. Let's say you're traveling somewhere where you think, you might be exposed to people who'd want to steal your crypto. You could lock your Bitcoin up into a vault for let's say, I don't know, 6 hours or 6 days or 18 months where even you can't access it.
Wow.
So if somebody ties you up and tries to force you to open your wallet, sorry, man, I can't get access. So it's actually exactly for situations like that, so that your crypto stays safe. They might beat you up anyways, but you won't be able to give them any crypto.
Next week, when you speak to the CEO, say Nick Furneaux said, why don't they go a little bit further than that and have a fake wallet that always holds 5% of your holdings or 1% of your holdings? So, if you go to Las Vegas or something and you got $1,000 because you're going to go out for the night, but what you do is you have a mugger wallet, so that's the one that the muggers, the criminals can find and they take off you and it's got $100 in it. You could do something like that where you have a slightly different login that still logs you into your environment, but what the attackers see is $100 essentially, and you can give them those funds and it looks like you've cleared out your wallet. So tell him he can have that one for free.
But unless they have some kind of analytics or block explorer where they know or they're able to associate a certain wallet with you, and they say we know that you have access to this wallet, or we presume that you have access to these private keys.
They could do that by sending you some funds. But if you were using Bitcoin, for example, properly, you would use a different address for every single transaction, which means you'd need to be getting into clustering mechanisms and stuff like that. But that's an interesting response, actually. I reckon we could fix it, though. I reckon that's doable.
Yeah, okay. We got to brainstorm on this a little bit more. So tell me, who's the book for, right? Anybody who's listening to this, most of our audience are people who have some kind of association with crypto, either on the building side, the investing side, the trading side. Who is this book specifically geared to? Who is it written for?
Anybody that is interested in the methodology of criminology, that's a lot of ologies, around crypto. So the first half of the book is looking at the ways by which crypto is involved in money laundering, how it's perpetrated in different frauds and so on and so forth. So it's a very good education for both investigators and those who are looking to protect themselves in some way, to understand how it's done. The second half of the book is very much methodologies for investigation. So it's understanding how Bitcoin works and then applying that to the ways by which we would investigate stolen or malevolent use of Bitcoin. We then go into Ethereum and tracing through how we trace through contracts. How do we know where the funds have really gone? How do we track if people are using gaming NFTs to launder money? How can we trace through that and follow the funds? And then we go into things like Binance Smart Chain, how that's slightly different, how that works, and how we can, again, use that. And as I think I mentioned, Tron, and then seizure and the things we would need to think about with freezing orders and seizure and that sort of thing. But one thing right through the book is I've got contributors of some of the best people on the planet. So Erin West, who wrote the foreword, Carol House, who's head of cyber at the White House, Ari Redboard, who was DOJ and now head of policy, I think his job title is at TRM Labs.
Like
Phil Aris, who ran crypto for the UK policing, Erica Stanford, who wrote Crypto Wars, top lawyers writing about how to do seizure orders and things like that. So right the way through. And actually, Iggy Azad, who was at UK police when they did the very first primary seizure, actually on a moving train of crypto, sort of Mission Impossible stuff. And he's written up that story for us. So right the way through, you've got these different practitioners that do things and have come from different perspectives. So, legislators would love this. Lawyers would benefit from it. Compliance people, investigators, whether that be, corporate investigators, law enforcement investigators, really anyone that finds themselves in and around crypto and want to understand how it gets criminalized, I think would benefit from it. Maybe not from every chapter. I mean, how to follow funds through a contract. You need to be drinking some coffee when you read that chapter. But a lot of it would be pertinent for most people in that space.
Okay, Beyond the Code audience, you guys heard that. Go ahead and buy your books. I'm going to share a link in the episode summary.
It's 515 pages, guys. There's a lot of it to get through. So it's almost twice the length of the original book.
You could read it in snippets.
I probably would. Yes. Yeah, my wife got through the first few chapters and said it was very interesting, but I noticed she hasn't
get the Audible version.
Oh dear, fun times.
I think like in the old commercials in the 90s, they'd always say like batteries sold separately. So I feel like you need like a disclaimer that it doesn't come with the TRM Lab subscription.
Sadly not. I mean, it's interesting actually, because I wrote most of this while after we'd been purchased by TRM Labs. Of course, I do a couple of days a week for TRM. And the reality is that I sort of accepted their offer because it was the primary tool that I was using. And that's no disrespect to, I have a lot of respect for Chainalysis, Elliptic and others. But it just had become my go-to tool. It's a terrific tool. But I've actually written a chapter on whether you need a commercial tool. And I actually say no, but yes, but no, but yes. You can do much of this stuff manually, just with online blockchain explorers, but the commercial tools are just going to make your life so much easier. You're getting those big attribution databases. Some of the AI capability now is really, really good. So actually in the book, I say, look, guys, I work for TRMs. Please be aware of that. But I encourage people that have budget to go and research the tools because they do work in slightly different ways. So the TRM forensics very much worked in the type of investigations I was doing and the way I like to see that data. Whereas if you look at Elliptic's tool, one of the co-founders is a friend of mine, Tom Robinson's a good guy, but it works in a very different way. And it orients itself to a slightly different audience, I would suggest, although he may punch me in the face for saying that. So you do need, even though I would say, look, go see TRM Labs, it is a terrific tool, you need to look at these tools carefully. And if you have budget, you need more than one. If you go back to the old forensics days, you wouldn't just buy Encase or just buy FTK or just buy Xways. If any of your listeners are forensics people, you would tend to have two tools on your desktop, and you would be looking at how that drive partitioned up in more than one tool, because sometimes Encase would get it wrong and FTK would get it right, and vice versa. And really, I would always recommend multiple tools. So you do need them. So yes, I'll always bang the TRM drum. It's a fantastic tool, but it doesn't mean it's right for absolutely every situation. And so, buyers need to go and really look at the tools and do their research.
Yeah. And I could just say, if you're starting out in forensics and you don't want to pay for any of these commercial tools, There are like a number of free versions that could just give you an understanding as to how analytics software works, like OKLink and Blocksy, and
Yeah.
Wallet Explorer.
Yeah.
And this will get you like far enough to just get a basic understanding, so that if you do go ahead and get a commercial tool, it will bring a lot more value to you than it would if you just start with that on day one.
And it's really important. I mean, one of the things you will not see in this book is any graphs from commercial tools. And that's not me being disloyal to my employer. It is because an investigator needs to understand how this works manually before you start pressing buttons in a commercial tool, because it will generate these lovely graphs, but you won't understand what's going on in the engine room. What's really happening when I see that link or that jump through a tether contract, or what does that mean? And you can really only get that by actually getting into, maybe an explorer like, Etherscan or something like that, and being able to look at the transaction and look at the underlying code in that transaction and understand what is going on in that coin swap or, whatever it might be. And then when you fire up your commercial tool, yeah, it's going to simplify, it's going to speed things up, but you know what is going on. And of course, for law enforcement people, if they're ever going to stand on a stand in front of a judge and the judge says, "How did you find that?" and they say, "Oh, I pressed the big red button in my commercial tool," that ain't going to fly. You need to be able to say, well, we use commercial tools to find this, and then we recreated that flow. We were able to confirm the results and so on and so forth. That's going to be really, really important. So learn the basics and then apply that to your chosen tool if you have the funds to do it.
Nick, thank you for that. And thank you for this entire episode. It was, very fun and informative. And I think anybody who's listening can definitely get a lot out of it. And I haven't read it yet, but I highly recommend the book, okay? Because it was recommended by a lot of people that I trust. And because I read Nick's first book and it was phenomenal. Here's a plug. I'm gonna share the link, and I am looking forward to receiving my copy and reading it, and maybe having you on for another episode that I could poke holes in it after I've had the opportunity to go through the whole thing.
Do you know, one of the things is I've left more out of this book than I put in, and it's still too long. And so yeah, it'd be very interesting to get that sort of feedback for sure.
All right, thank you so much. And if people want to get in touch with you or follow your content, what platform are you most active on? How can they reach out to you?
I'm not a very social media-y person, but I am on LinkedIn. If you just search Nick Furneaux, you'll see this aging face staring out at you. So Furneaux, F-U-R-N-E-A-U-X. If you just look for that on LinkedIn and come follow, and almost all of my content.
All right, I'll share a link to your LinkedIn as well. Cool. Okay, perfect.
Thanks, man. Lovely to hang out with you today.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Code. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share with your friends, and to tune in again next week for more fun and insightful conversation.